Great, thank you. So this presentation is examining driver takeover decisions and trust at rural intersections. So traditional rural through-stop intersections consistently experience high rates of serious injury and fatal crashes. And these types of traditional intersections often create ample opportunity for severe and deadly angled collisions. So one alternative intersection design, or perhaps referred to as a non-traditional intersection, is the J-turn intersection. This type of intersection, for those in Michigan, referred to as the Michigan left, or known as the restricted crossing U-turn intersection or reduced conflict intersection, can decrease the points of conflict because it restricts the straight crossing and left turning movements from the minor road across the major road of the highway. So although J-turns can increase travel time by approximately a minute or so compared to traditional rural through-stop intersections, past research suggests that these types of J-turn intersections can reduce crash rates and the number of injury-related fatal crashes. However, past research conducted in our laboratory shows that the novelty of this type of intersection design can lead to increased driver errors and also dissatisfaction from road users. Some of the reasons that road users are resistant to these types of intersections is due to the required non-conventional movements to navigate the intersection, as well as the perceptions about the increases in travel time, the potential physical constraints that it might have on farm vehicles or commercial trucks while navigating. So in our research, we see that some of this resistance is paired with errors made. So in a simulation study, we found that drivers who frequently made more major and moderate types of errors on J-turns, so errors such as cutting through the center of the intersection or missing the U-turn altogether, on their first exposure, when we put them through these types of intersections multiple times, tend to predict decreased acceptance and willingness to drive on J-turn intersections. So when we think about combining the novelty of these types of intersections with advanced driver assistance system technologies, this might introduce new challenges with drivers manually taking over control at J-turn intersections. We know from past work that drivers might lose trust in automated vehicles when they're considering other types of select use cases, such as whether or not they'd trust and be comfortable with drowsy vehicles driving under drowsy driving conditions. And similarly, comfort with automated vehicles, navigating complex or novel environments such as J-turn can really vary based on the perceived capabilities of the automation. So other research that we have conducted in the past has found that drivers tend to feel, of course, more comfortable with a highly automated vehicle, so a level 4 or level 5 automated vehicle, but tend to report less comfort with lower levels of automation, so levels 1 through 3. However, there are also individual differences to consider. Another study that we did found that there are gender differences, for example, in the level of trust, where women tend to be less trusting of higher levels of automation compared to men, suggesting that this trust is not uniform across all drivers. So there have been, of course, a number of studies examining takeover performance and driver trust when driving a vehicle with lower levels of automation, such as level 2 or level 3. But there have really been no studies examining how navigating rural intersection designs with conditionally automated vehicles influence driver decision-making and driver trust in conditionally automated vehicles. So the purpose of this study was to explore whether different types of rural intersection designs, so non-traditional versus traditional, so J-turn intersections, conventional rural through-stop intersections or roundabout designs influence driver trust and comfort with conditionally automated vehicles. And a secondary goal of this work was to look at secondary factors that might predict differences in driver trust and comfort with conditionally automated vehicles, given some of those differences we've seen in past work. So this study was conducted through Prolific, which is a crowdsourcing platform. And inclusion criteria for this study, we recruited participants from across the US, and so they need to be a current resident and self-reported having a valid driver's license. Participants were told that they would watch a series of videos of a conditionally automated vehicle with level 3 automation. So they were presented with this image here on the right-hand side of the screen as a reference point to understand what we were meaning specifically by a level 3 conditionally automated vehicle. We had a sample based on previous power analysis of a goal of 275 participants, or 270 rather. We did recruit originally 275, and then after screening resulted in a final sample size of 271 with the average age of about 44 years. We also asked participants to self-report their urbanicity. So do they live in an urban, suburban, and rural area in the United States? So we had about half living in suburban, and then split the rest across urban and rural areas. We also asked participants later on about their familiarity or knowledge of J-turn intersections and their experience crossing J-turn intersections. So when we asked about this, we also presented them with a description of a J-turn intersection and a visualization describing the process of going through a J-turn intersection. So the overall flow of the study, participants completed this online. The survey was created in Qualtrics and then recruited the sample, as I mentioned, through Prolific. Participants were presented with a study information sheet and proceeded to provide basic demographic information, so things such as age and education and so on. And then we randomized participants into two different video blocks. So there was a traffic block and a no traffic block. And within each of these blocks, there were 5 videos of different rural intersections. The videos were identical. However, they varied with or without the presence of traffic. So within each block, participants were asked to watch these 5 short simulated videos, and then they provided their ratings of trust and comfort measures and provided feedback about their takeover decision after watching each of the videos. Following the completion of those 5 videos, they completed some post-test measures specifically about J-turns. So we asked these after the fact to avoid biasing any decisions. So again, they completed the familiarity and experience measures, as I mentioned previously. We asked them about their attitudes towards towards J-turns, so their willingness to drive on J-turns, how much support they would have in the community, and if they thought J-turns are a good idea. And then finally, we asked them about their comfort with a level 3 AV driving on a J-turn for them. So we've got some bird's eye view images of what each of the paths look like, just to give you an idea for the visualization. So there were 5 videos, as mentioned, and then these were further collapsed into 3 different categories for analyses. And so the J-turn intersection, referred to as the non-traditional intersection, we had 2 types. 2 different locations within Minnesota. So you can see the path here in the left side with the yellow here. So as you approach the intersection to make a left, you have to go right, enter through the deceleration lane, make a U-turn, and then proceed on down the main line. And then, so for the videos, these were created within using our driving simulator on campus. And the videos were created by a member of our research team using a GoPro. The GoPro was mounted to a bracket between two headrests within the driving simulator vehicle so that the interior of the vehicle and the upcoming roadway was visible, including both of the mirrors. So we had the driver's seat positioned back as far back as it would allow so that the driver was out of frame. And we essentially created the illusion that the vehicle was driving, hands off. The researcher wore dark clothing and gloves to conceal the fact that there was someone actually operating the vehicle. Here's an example of that, navigating the J-turn intersection. After watching each of these videos, again, they provided their ratings, which I'll touch on in a moment. We do have the other videos made available and glad to share in a database. So again, like I mentioned, they represented these 5 videos in random order. The second non-traditional intersection was another J-turn variation. Here's the path. The third non-traditional type of intersection was a roundabout. So we know also from past work that those who tend to be resistant to J-turns are also pretty resistant to roundabout intersections. And then they were presented with navigating through the conventional or the traditional roll through step intersection. And then we also had a work zone simulation for participants, as well as sort of another comparison group. All right, so measures, just as a little bit more detailed overview for demographic information. As I mentioned previously, we collected things such as age, race, education, vehicle make, model, and then also asked participants about the number of existing ADAS features within their current vehicles. We used 3 different types of trust and comfort measures. The situational trust for automated driving. So this is asking about driver experience specific to each of the scenarios. So how much do they think they could trust the AV? Did it perform? Do they think they could have performed better? Would the AV have made safe judgments, unsafe judgments, or react inappropriately in this condition? So that was a 6-item scale aggregated for analysis. And then we also asked just 2 one-item measures. So we asked how much they trusted the automated vehicle in this navigating this intersection and how comfortable they were. So essentially to provide a little bit more convergent validity in the analysis. And then we also asked participants after watching each video whether or not they would have preferred to take over control or if they would have wanted the automated vehicle to navigate this intersection. And then the post measures, the J-turn measures, so the attitudes, their familiarity and experience, and then their comfort and in a level 3 automated vehicle driving for them. All right, so results. So we did not find any significant differences in takeover decisions across intersection types. So as I mentioned, these were collapsed into traditional, non-traditional, and work zone. And I will mention that there were also no differences within the five intersections as well. So there was not much variability. These were further collapsed for the analysis. And this did not matter whether there was traffic or not. Um, when we look at differences in trust and comfort by intersection type, we also did not find any differences in the type of intersection. Again, similar with looking across the five intersections versus the collapse to the three categories. Participants tended to report similar trust and comfort across all intersection types. So then we looked specifically at other types of predictors of each of these trust and comfort measures. And so some of the findings show that higher education levels tended to predict more trust in the automated vehicle. Um, Having previous J-turn experience showed to be predictive of having greater trust. And lastly, takeover decision. So the largest effect here, with there being a relationship between whether or not participants reported wanting to take over control, was largely predictive of trust in the situation. So um, those who did not take over control were less trusting. Similarly, oops. Similarly, when we look at that single measure of trust, we find um, kind of similar findings again with education being predictive. Previous J-turn experience is predictive of being more trusting in the automated vehicle, as well as urbanicity. So those who report living in urban areas tend to be more trusting of the vehicle across all scenarios. And then again, takeover decisions are highly predictive of trust. And again, with measures of comfort, we see that education and previous J-turn experience, and then again, urbanicity and takeover decisions. So same emerging trends, which also shows that some validation that these measures are measuring similar things. And then looking at secondary predictors. So participants again were asked, how comfortable are you with a level 3 automated vehicle driving for you on a J-turn intersection? Wanted to look at more demographic and attitudinal predictors of what might be predictive, specifically when we asked them about this scenario. And so we see actually the opposite effect with education. So lower levels of reported education tend to be more trusting of level 3 AVs driving for them on the intersection, as well as the number of automation features. So the more automation features participants had in their current vehicles, they tended to be slightly more trusting. The effect is pretty small, and also those who tend to think that J-turns are a good idea tend to be more supportive of the AV driving for them on the J-turn. So the other outcome of this work resulted in the development of a data repository. So kind of another secondary goal of this work was to create these low-cost, scalable simulations that could be used by other research teams, keeping in mind of openness and transparency of data sharing. And so we have created this data set on the DRUM, the data repository for the University of Minnesota. We'll have a DOI and link available soon. So it's got the 10 curated videos of the simulated drives, as well as the final data set from the study. So kind of taken together, the primary goal was to see if there were differences in driver trust and comfort with automated vehicles. We did not see any differences by rural intersection type. However, we saw that takeover decisions were strongly related to trust and comfort with level 3 SAE AVs. So, when given the choice, right, drivers might be prone to manual takeovers at this intersection, which does risk potential loss to the safety that could provide drivers in such decisions, such as safe gap selection. And we saw that trust and comfort in conditionally automated vehicles might differ when exposed to different driving environments. So that is something that was limited in the study is we examined exclusively rural intersection design. So given that we know urban drivers tended to be more trusting, we might see some differences in trust when we look at different types of simulated intersections. Um, or had we found differences in the intersection design, it could have informed automation. But instead, the findings from this work show that maybe we do need to focus more on individual differences, and there may be a need for more customized interfaces and support of the who's in the driver's seat, so they know who feels supported. So this information could be applied to or integrated into things such as driver's education or to better inform and increase the understanding of the differences in levels of automation. Um, so of course, the study was limited. We had users experience this um, simulated environment online through video. So it could be a completely different experience had we brought them into our driving simulator. So that's something we'd like to explore in the future, as well as maybe the application of eHMI interfaces to help encourage or examine differences in takeover decisions.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. Folks can ask questions in the chat. We already have a few coming in. So I don't know if you can particularly speak to this, Dr. Tweeters, but one person has asked, what is the return on investment for deploying digital infrastructure to support CAV applications in rural areas? I know this work doesn't really touch on that. Curious if you have any insights on something like that.
Sorry, could you repeat that question? I don't see it in the chat.
Oh yeah, sorry. This was one that was asked in advance. I apologize. Yeah, I can read it again. What's the return on investment for deploying digital infrastructure to support CAV applications in rural areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good question. In terms of the scalability of some of that infrastructure, I would think it would be a high ROI, particularly because many rural intersections have really low average daily traffic. And so meeting the expense to rural areas to treat all these various intersections would be highly expensive and hard to maintain. So having something that is digital should be at a lower cost for long-term maintenance and deployment, and more adaptable as things are changing and signage standards for some of these more novel intersections where there's not quite as much sort of uh, history on what is the best way to mark or sign some of these particularly non-traditional rural intersections.
Great, thank you. We have one in the chat right now. In the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that there is dissatisfaction with J-turns. Is there any correlation between the persons who were most dissatisfied, for example, education level, living in urban or rural environments, and the level 3 trust results?
To look at that mashup of particularly low satisfaction and trust. I would imagine they are correlated, um, but I'm not sure if I have that handy.
Yeah, nor do I. That is a really good question. Certainly be glad to look at that. get back to. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I know in some of the work that we had done previously for drowsy driving trust, sometimes there was an interesting flip where if someone began with higher trust and automation, they would say they were less trusting of that automation to support them when they were drowsy. And it would then go in the reverse order. So if they began with low trust in automation, they would sometimes have higher trust considering the use case of being drowsy. And so sometimes these things will invert themselves if you begin with low trust, but then you sort of unpack. So, sort of this judgment decision making principles of pack versus unpack decision making. And we find that sometimes people's judgment will sort of revert to the opposite of whatever their basic trust is when they're considering an unpacked scenario.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, I guess one question that I have in particular, talking about future work and using maybe a vehicle simulator. Here at Umtree, we have a vehicle simulator lab as well. In ours, the user is wearing a VR headset additionally, and they're controlling a real vehicle on our M-City test facility. And we've found that participants are far more engaged and maybe a little more cautious or aware of their surroundings, knowing that they're actually in control of a real vehicle versus a simulated vehicle. Curious if that's something that your team is interested in exploring, or maybe you've done some work in that in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm also a part of a team at UMN that we are doing teleoperation. So Brad Dreyhus is on the call, also working on that. I think there are a number of other factors that kind of interfere with people's levels of engagement and trust when you're doing teleoperated driving, particularly the latency component that you have so much variability in the latency, and so that really changes people's engagement and trust and how much the information that they receive is directly inputted into the control of the vehicle, and then how much is the information that they're seeing is that up to date or accurate information. So I think there's a lot that we can do to be trying to kind of merge up the work that we've been doing with, decades and decades of simulated driving research and comparing that to what we're now doing with teleoperations, where you still have the ability to safely test out some of these driving performance and decision-making things, but safely and at a lower cost. Because, you certainly can be throttling the input output of the simulation to simulate some of those latency losses that we have with teleoperations, and not risk some of the things that we would like to test out with teleoperations, but are really a challenge. I mean, it's nice to have a closed course like at M-City or other places, but still having a lot of these dynamic interactions of pedestrians and vehicles entering the roadway at unexpected rates. I think simulation still has a lot to value, and I think offer a value, and I think we may be kind of entering a new era of the value of simulation as we're getting deeper and deeper into teleoperations.
Awesome. Thanks. I will give folks about one more minute to ask questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you want to turn on your microphone and ask your question. We have one in the chat. It is mentioned that the testing was done in a simulator. Were there any measures to ensure that the experience felt real enough? So I guess that's kind of what we're talking about, or felt real enough that the stakes were high, like they're actually on the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think, some of the validity that we were able to offer with this simulation is that they were actual Minnesota roadways. So, many of these, particularly the J turns, are really built to spec, and so we were able to provide a very immersive experience. The buildings, the trees, those are all sort of as is in the real environment. So that gives us a lot of that kind of face validity. And the traffic patterns was one of the things that we were really trying to explore to see whether or not some of these other kind of stress-inducing kind of things would have an impact. So I agree, it's very difficult. We're like, you're already removed when you're doing simulation, and now we're one more step removed that you're watching a video of a simulation. The fact that we didn't see a difference with the traffic patterns, I think gives us some insight into the influences, but certainly I think we need to do more work to really explore how those factors would influence decision making. I think we probably are only able to see trends rather than true behavior and true decision making with this study. Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious if any of the participants had mentioned that they were familiar with the specific J turns that they were seeing in video, and if that maybe had an impact on their comfort level.
Right. Yeah. And I think, we certainly did see that with the relationship between those that reported that they did have experience with J turns, that they had driven on them, they were knowledgeable of them. And so I think that is a piece of that, the familiarity of what it is like to navigate one of these intersections. I think, one of the other pieces that it was just particularly interesting to me in our results is just how often they said that they would take over control. And so, I think that in and of itself, given that there really were no consequences to them in this scenario, and they were able to see the vehicle successfully navigate the intersection, and yet they still felt like they would want to take over control. And I think that speaks really volumes to where the current kind of ethos of where drivers are and their readiness to let automated vehicles navigate through trickier intersections or rural intersections in general. And so even though we weren't able to see some differences in the complexity or the novelty of some of these intersections, I think it still helps us unpack that we're going to have a lot of takeovers. And so some of these safety gains that we would expect to see in some of our rural intersections where we see the vast majority of our fatal crashes are happening in these types of intersections in rural parts of Minnesota and nationwide. We really want drivers to be using this automated technology, but if they're taking over control every time they come up on one of these more complex intersections, it shows just how much work we have to do to improve the HMI and improve the education and performance, quite frankly. I mean, I think many of us know in this call that a lot of our automation actually isn't there. And so in some ways you could look at this and go, oh, people aren't trusting inappropriately. It very well could be that they are very appropriately untrusting of this automation, and rightfully so, taking over control before the tech is really ready.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of our director often references a survey where folks felt more comfortable swimming with a shark versus being a passenger in an AV. So yeah, we certainly have a ways to go there. Well, if we don't have any more questions from the audience, I want to thank Nichole and Katelyn for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here.